And as you will see, thank you. And as you will see, just with the intersections of the different modules that they always speak to each other. So you'll find that each and every time we get into a Nugget session or you start a new module, you'll always find elements of the previous module within the new module or within a discussion that we host within the Nugget sessions. So yeah, so just to give you a small overview just in terms of how the session today will go. First, you will hear from Jaren, who will speak to messaging strategies to enhance collaboration and content tactics for boosting online engagement. Excuse me, then I will take us into a practical session on agile content operations and healthy and safe content practices, basically how to keep our storytelling both flexible and sustainable. Then Pumza will walk us through the assignment structure, focusing on how to align your personal and organizational purpose with your content strategy. And then finally, Gigi will be showing us how multimedia storytelling can be used to drive real social change. But before we do that, we're going to do a little quick check-in to see how everyone is doing and how everyone is feeling. And today, our check-in little quick around the room moment. Oh, Balu has a question.
Yes, Balu, you can unmute your mic, my love, and then ask your question. Balu? Okay, Api, we move on. I think Balu might have some technical difficulties, but we can always just round back to a question.
Awesome. So today I'd like us to think about how we are arriving in the space today and just share in just like a single prompt. And today's prompt is color. So what color represents how you feel today? So we can just go around the room and just say, I feel pink today, and just tell us why you feel pink or why you feel red or why you feel blue, why you feel white, whatever the color is, just to get a sense of how we're feeling, where we are in terms of, our spirit, our mind, and just how we feel generally with work. So, who is keen on starting us with how they feel using a color that comes first in mind?
I'll go first.
Thanks, Zia.
So I'm feeling light blue today, and the reason for that color is I'm off today, so I'm not working today, so I'm just really peaceful. Had a really slow morning, and yeah, I'm just enjoying taking my time, having a good time, and I'm at peace. So I'm light blue.
Awesome. Thanks, light blue. Anyone else?
Api, we in the chat is some conversation going on about the weather and how they are feeling. So Sunay says she's feeling blue. The sickness is defeating me this week. Sunay, do you want to expand? Oh, she has no voice. Sorry, my love. Anyway,
Hi everyone. Sorry, I didn't lift up my hand.
Mbadi and Akona.
Sorry. Cool. So I feel yellow. I feel very vibrant. I'm in good spirits, and yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I think the color that represents how I feel today is green. Um, yeah, so because I think the past couple of days with the national dialogue and everything else has been quite negative, but I'm feeling quite hopeful. And that will turn around the corner as a country and there'll be an element of growth and renewal in a sense, as well leading up to the spring season as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Akwana. Karabo?
Morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Oh, I feel
Yep,
like I'm
we can hear you.
Oh, sorry. I thought my volume was down. I'm feeling gray. And the reason I chose gray is because black signifies in my head. It's like mourning, loss, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. But also it's gray because there's that white, as in like at some point you get to the other side. So I'm just holding on for the other side because yare. Yeah.
Sending all the strength, Garab. We're sending all the strength. We'll take the last two hands, which is Latifa and AMC short courses. Latifa, you can go.
Afternoon, everyone. My color is magenta today. I'm overflowing in creative imagination. One of my books is done. I have another book that's finishing up soon. The submission date is for the end of August. I'm just excited. I know there's a lot of negativity going around, but I've decided to take myself and remove myself from spaces that are negative because I'm more for being proactive in life than being reactive. Thank you.
Thanks, Latifa. And lastly, AMC short courses.
Hi everyone, it's Matty. I'm just using the short courses Zoom. I was like, MC short courses. Well, that's me. I'm feeling red. I'm wearing my red workout clothes because I'm hoping that it will inspire me to go work out
Are you
and
feeling
feel
dangerous?
flash. So yeah, I'm ready to go and excited. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So there seems to be a split. So some are feeling slightly, positive, and obviously we have a little bit of blues going on, and hopefully all the folks that are feeling a little bit of blues will leave the session feeling tad bit positive and inspired and encouraged to do, a little bit of going in there and uplifting yourself and really just encouraging you also with the work, and hopefully it will leave you feeling a tad bit lighter. So we will kick off. I'm going to kick off, as I mentioned, with Jaren. So Jaren will be kicking off us the session where he will be speaking, as I mentioned, to essentially messaging strategies to enhance collaboration and content tactics for boosting online engagement. Over to you, Jaren. I'm not sure if Jaren can hear me.
I could. I'm so sorry. I was watching the room with entries, which I will ask for someone else on the team to watch while I present, please. But
Okay.
also then I could
I'll
not
watch.
find, thank you so much. Also then I could not find my mic button because those two things happen simultaneously. Hi, everyone.
Hi, sorry, Jaren. Do you
Mhm.
mind making me host so that I can let people in?
Absolutely. Uh, mm, oh, I think I'd shared host privileges with everybody.
Okay.
Uh, Yeah, I think you should have host privileges. Plums, can you check really quick?
Yes,
Uh,
Jazz.
Okay, awesome.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, Morning, everyone. So I'm very, very excited that we're making it all the way to module 3. I'm really, really glad that everyone is coming on really nicely with their coursework, and we cannot say again how proud we are of you for really taking up the challenges of the assignments 1 and 2. Now that we've got to module 3, you can see how the curricular structure is building upon itself and why we've chosen to introduce the concepts to you in the order that we have. So now that we've got to this section, and we want to talk about the strategies to enhance collaboration and the content tactics for boosting your engagements, I'll really just go through the purpose of the section of the course with you, which is to help understand how strategic messaging can spark collaboration and encourage active participation from audiences. You may have heard the term before where we talk about vanity metrics. And vanity metrics are when you look at the surface level of your followers and you look at how many likes a post has got and you look at how many shares a post has got, and we think that that is the end of the story. Actually, because we're in social impact, we really want to make inroads into how posts are engaged with and how they stimulate our audiences to take actions, to do better, to really involve themselves with the work that your organization is doing. So, because these spaces are thriving on relationships, we need to equip the participants with, approaches and activities that can kind of go beyond one-way communication and start to have a dialogue with our audiences. We don't build relationships by talking to people one way. We create opportunities for engagement, and meaningful engagement means meaningful relationship building, meaningful collaboration, and meaningful participation in the activities of your organization. When we share ownership of narratives, then we feel equally participatory in the action that the organization is taking. So, how do we do this? So, if we accept that strong messaging is not simply about telling people what you want them to hear, then that opens space for engagement. So, when we've been talking to you over the past 2 weeks about who you want to distribute messaging to, that was what the audience was, segmentation and the audience investigation was about, and the goals and the objectives of your communication. We went quite deep into who is listening to the message, what is the message for, and what are we hoping to achieve by the message. So we all know that we don't simply craft a message so that the audience is um, delighted by that message. We give the audience actually what they need to engage and what to approach us with. So in this message crafting and the alignment of that with audience values, we can strengthen that collaboration and the ability to interface with our audiences. We can amplify our own visibility, and quite importantly, we can amplify our own trust relationships because if we are communicating one way, then we are just an information source. If we are communicated in a two-way engaging relationship, then we are more than a source. We are a trusted collaborator on messaging. Um, And this kind of trust ensures that you gain traction. So if I trust you as an engagement source, I'm going to tell other people about you. If I trust the work that you're doing, then the statistics that you're finding, that the messages that you're spreading, that the theory of change you're affecting is something that I'm going to be a vocal amplifier of. And so we take those online conversations offline and into actual relationships and workplaces and homes and spaces where they can be organically amplified. So, dominant narratives are a problem within our space. Dominant narratives are often the narratives that are structurally unsound, that are structurally oppressive, that make our entry point into our work difficult because of the internal biases that they create in audiences. So, with the stimulation of empathy and the stimulation of resonance and the stimulation of relationship building, we can create new compelling stories. And by creating those new compelling stories and involving the audience as a contributor, involving the audience as active participants, generating content, generating comments, engaging with your work, visiting your website, visiting your fundraising pages, you are going to get the kind of resilient and robust audience boost that will make sure that even if you don't have numbers that runs in the tens of thousands on your platforms, that you are definitely having an impactful experience in the communication with your audiences. So, at this point, are there any specific questions, or can we go into what we're aiming to teach with Module 3? Does anyone have a question or comment? Okay. Maybe if we talk a little bit about the messaging strategies and the boosting online engagement, there'll be more opportunity for engagement. So, Module 2, as we all remember, focused on audience segmentation. And audience segmentation is understanding who we are speaking to. So, now that we have target audiences, what do we do with them? Well, that's a really good question in terms of we've done all that work, we've identified the segments of audiences that we can speak to and the strategies that we might want to use to talk to them. How does our messaging to those audiences drive meaningful online collaboration? By collaboration, we mean those things that I just mentioned before, user-generated content, two-way conversation, engagement with your fundraising drives, engagement with your website asks, engagement with your social media content, so that you're not talking into the ether, but you're having the other end of the broadcast network talk back to you. And so we're trying to move the progression from knowing and understanding your audience to actually engaging your audience. This becomes a really, really important task when we want to get user feedback. And also, we want to prove that the message to funders, to monitoring and evaluation consultants, to ourselves, that our programming is actually working because it is stimulating response. Remember, this is also really, really useful for messaging engagement research because we have now a direct line to people who are experiencing and engaging with your messaging and saying, this is what the messaging makes us feel, think, and do. There are also other ways to uh, evaluate that metric by situations like A/B messaging and also checking of the metrics in terms of when a social media post stimulates a certain action. And there are ways of setting up posts to understand how an audience is engaging with them, and there are ways of setting up posts to understand what exactly the reactions they're stimulating in audiences are, and there are ways of setting up posts to be able to capture quantitative metrics of how many people are clicking through, how many people are using a link, how many people are downloading a resource, et cetera, et cetera. All that leads us onto a PUR section, which is healthy and safe content practices and how to be agile and responsive in your content operations. So, Apua, do you want to take over?
Sure, thanks, Jay. I want to quickly share my screen. Um, Sorry, I forgot that my computer was wiped, so I'm not going to be able to share my screen, but I'll just walk us through, similar to how Jane did, um, my part of the presentation. So I'm speaking to agile content operations and healthy and safe content practices. So at this point, we've spoken obviously about messaging and engagement, and we are wanting now to think critically about how do we make sure that all of that content and all of that messaging and engagement remains the same and is we're gaining more and it's also sustainable. And we're doing it in a way where we're not constantly always having to reinvent the wheel. So what do we mean by agile content operations? So at its heart, agility is about being structured, but also being flexible. So when we talk about schedules and processes, in this context, we're really just speaking to your content plans, your content banks, how you really craft these cannot be rigid. A good example is how many impact organizations responded during the COVID, when COVID hit us. So a lot of organizations like Gift of the Givers and smaller community-based groups had to adapt their communication in real time. So shifting from planned campaigns, whatever campaigns that were planned in 2019 or early 2020, by the time COVID hit us, there had to be urgent updates about food relief and community safety. So they still worked within their broader mission, but their ability to be agile in content production made their work both credible and impactful. So that's just well, not even a small, that's just an example of how you can still work within the framework of what you already have, but just being more flexible and being agile. So that's what we really mean. So at its heart, being agile really means having structure around your flexibility and making sure that you always have some kind of proof, being bulletproof essentially. You always have some kind of proof in terms of ensuring that anything that could possibly sort of derail you from whatever structure that you have in place, you're able to be agile and flexible in ensuring that it doesn't entirely remove you from the outcome that you are looking for. So basically being able to adapt in real time and shift your plans, or just really think creatively about how to make sure that the work is not entirely at hold because something big has happened. Agility also means having a clear content calendar. So being ready to pivot when something urgent or relevant happens, as we've spoken about. So it's also about testing, learning, and adapting. So if you have a month-long campaign on youth employment, and the government policy, government introduces a new policy, you can adjust your messaging to connect to that moment while again keeping your core story intact. So, really, it's about thinking about ways where you can be able to reframe and reimagine, talking points or content themes in a way that's still aligned with the story that you want to tell. But you must also remember that agility is only half the story. We also need healthy and safe content practices as part of that process. And here, what I want to emphasize is two things. So, the well-being of the people producing the content, because I think oftentimes when we talk about, ethical storytelling, we oftentimes reduce it to just the content and not the people that are creating the content. So the well-being of the people producing the content and the safety and the dignity of the people represented in the content. So those two things are very important because when the person who's creating the content is in a good place to create the content, then we don't have a lot of clashes and we're not misaligned in terms of the messaging and what we would like to see. But also most importantly, the safety and dignity of the people represented in the content becomes a bigger deal because if the people that are represented in the content are not being represented in a manner that is ethical, in a manner that exploits their stories, in a manner that capitalize on the stories for not so good reasons, then we have an issue around ethical storytelling. And that becomes very important because oftentimes we look at, our deadlines and we see that, we need to tell this big story or we need to advocate for especially for issues around gender-based violence and sex work. There's always the need to always want to tell the most graphic stories, but really what we need to think about is really think about the safe ways and ways that do not strip away dignity of people. And we know historically South Africa has had big issues around misrepresenting stories for funding and using people's stories as poverty porn to get funding. So also the reason why those two things are very important is that also when you are communicating with funders or your managers, that needs to be the leading narrative or leading rhetoric around the kind of content that you create, especially if there's a big component of storytelling within your content, right? So we really need to critically think about what that means. Because if we're not thinking about, or at least we're not creating those creative boundaries, then we end up one facing burnout from the production side, but also we end up getting backlash because then we end up exploiting people's stories and not advocating for people. So there's a difference there that we constantly need to think about as we talk about agility. And then on the audience side, safe practices really mean respecting people's, as I say, dignity, consent, and privacy. So think about how stories around, as I mentioned, gender-based violence are often shared. So too many times, survivors' identities have been exposed without permission, or their trauma has been sensationalized for clicks. So a healthier practice is really about, seeking consent, framing stories in a way that empower rather than re-traumatize. And a good local example is the work of organizations like the Sonke Gender Justice, who consciously foreground survivor voices with consent and who prioritize storytelling that sparks action without really exploiting pain. So again, thinking really critically about how do you frame and how do you position the people that or the communities that you represent in your content. Inclusivity also matters here. Are we using, are we using conscious language that speaks to different groups in South Africa? Are we using, local languages to talk about some of the issues that we advocate for and some of the issues that we fight for within our organization? So again, it introduces new layers. So the more you think about sustainable ways of creating content, the more you unpack new layers and nuances in ensuring that your content is able to represent your community and represent the people that you advocate for with dignity. So really, really do think about how your content honors the people that your organization serves and the communities that you're a part of. And so for me, the takeaway for my section is really just thinking about sustainable communications that happens where agility and care go hand in hand. Thinking about flexible processes that allow to respond quickly, but also the need for practices that protect the people creating one and also consuming our content. So I'd like here to pause for us to sort of think about reflection, or maybe rather reflect on how we've been thinking about creating content within our own respective organizations. And maybe think about what challenges do you personally face in keeping your content operations both flexible and sustainable. You can feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat. Or share quick from some of your work. So yeah, just as a point of reflection, what are some of the challenges do you personally face in keeping your content operations both flexible and sustainable? Just something to think about as you think about agile content operations and safe content practices. So I'm going to leave it there whilst you think about that. And I am going to hand over to Pumza, who will be talking about the assignment that is linked to Module 3.
Hi, everyone. So originally, we were going to have Pumza do her section here to just land you in the assignment section, but she is now currently facing some computer difficulties. But I also think that this is a good intersection for this icebreaker activity, which also lands you in some of the examples that Apiwe is talking about and explaining how to actually interpret your communications into storytelling that is both impactful and encapsulates your narratives. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to take you through a little bit of a presentation that was prepared last year for the multimedia short courses training that we had offered before. So I'm just gonna share my screen, just checking which one is it now. There we go. It is this one. So just getting myself situated. So this is an interactive icebreaker. So it's aimed to help you spark some deeper conversations and reflections. And this activity is called Talking Pictures. So let's just start by setting the scene. So we'll be looking at a specific image and discussing what it represents. And this will be an opportunity for everyone to express their interpretations, their emotions, and their thoughts. And I'm going to show you a series of images from a photo documentary called I Know That Is a Lifetime Scar. And it's very, I think, opportunistic and in sync that Apiwe had mentioned Sonke Gender Justice, because this is part of a gallery hosted by Sonke Gender Justice. It's a non-profit organization working at the frontier of non-violence and gender-based violence by accessing this perception with advocating with men or educating men around gender-based violence. So this image, among others, it reflects the profound impact of gender-based violence and its long-lasting effects on individuals. So the photo serves as a visual narrative, emphasizing the emotional and physical scars left behind by such trauma. And the gallery aims to raise awareness and foster discussion to the need for justice and support for survivors. And just while you are looking at the images, I will read sections of the corresponding article because this was an article published as well. So these images may evoke a range of emotions, and I just want you to note what emotions is coming up for you. And I want you to take a moment to really absorb what you are actually interfacing with. Okay, so let's do it. Can you guys see? Okay. I know it's a lifetime scar. I suffered alone. I bled severely for weeks when I was cut on my sacred place. Benigna Samuel has a gentle face, two soft dimples on each cheek. Her smile comes easily. But as she reflects the events that shaped the woman she would become, her brown eyes darken. The fear as she readied herself under the shade of the thatched roof of the hut she shared with her mother in preparation for the brutal, barbaric act is palpable. Female genital mutilation is described by the World Health Organization as the deliberate mutilation of female genitalia. It is often the removal or cutting of the labia and clitoris for non-medical reasons. According to WHO, more than 100 million girls and women have been cut in 30 countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, where the practice is the most common. In Tanzania, the practice of FGM as well as child marriage and pregnancy is widespread, and through the Law of Marriage Act in 1971 remains legal. The cutting of young girls' genitals is seen as a rite of passage into adulthood, signifying her readiness for marriage and confirms that she could fetch a good bride's price, dowry in the form of cattle. So in Tanzania, FGM happens at a young age. Data collected by non-governmental organization, the Children's Dignity Forum, CDF, in 2010 shows that 44% of FGM victims interviewed had undergone the ritual before the age of 1. And however, work being carried out by civil society organizations like CDF is helping to educate policymakers, religious and traditional leaders, and community members with the aim to outlaw and ultimately eradicate this human rights violation. The young girls I met in the northeastern district of Tarime seeing the pictures as a tool used by traditional leaders and male relatives to deny them an education. In the village here, women are not seen as individuals with agency. Their purpose is to marry, produce offspring, and manage the household duties. In addition to this repression, many young girls experience life-threatening health problems as a result of the practice, which can cause severe bleeding and lead to problems urinating, cysts, infections, as well as complications in childbirth and increase the risk of newborn deaths. Benina, pictured here, was 14 when her father and brothers first applied pressure on her to undergo FGM. They hoped to make her more valuable to the men they wanted her to marry. She would bring disgrace to her family if she did not follow through with her arrangements, they said. Her imagination was filled with images of the bad spirits she would attract when she would not undergo the procedure. Later, she would lie on her straw bed alone in the dark, bleeding from her genitals, with the same relatives refusing to assist her out of fear that she would die. If she did, they worried they would be ostracized by the community. Now 25, Benina lives with her mother Elizabeth in a small hut on the rolling hills of the Marina Water in Tarim, where she raises her son Simon, who is 2. So giggling boys pass the time chasing livestock while Penina and her mother, who is rooted herself deeply in a Christian faith, bask in the sunshine before the rain comes. So at this point, I just want you to think about what is the first emotion or thought that comes to mind when you see these images, and how does the image and the context, like the body language, the expression, the environment, the angles, influence your interpretation. What do you think the storyteller wants to convey with these emotions through these images? And what is the message here? Okay? So just to consolidate all of these points that was raised, while considering the pictures, right? What is the emotional impact? Focus on the facial expression and the body language. What emotions do they convey? What symbolism is there? Are there any symbolic elements like scars that represent deeper meanings or struggles? And in this example, the scar of the FGM practice, right? It's used as a threadwear and as a tool to tell a story. What are the contextual clues? Like look at the background and the setting to gain a better understanding of the environment and the circumstance. And then also understand the cultural significance. Reflect on any cultural or societal norms that the image might represent or challenge. Right. So after everyone has shared, I'll just go around the room to ask everyone their different perspectives. We will see and how this can be viewed differently. So I'm just gonna take a pause there and get some feeling around the room. Does anyone want to contribute to the conversation? No hands? Don't everyone rush at once? Okay. So, what do you think the storyteller wants to convey in these images? Was the first question. Just think about that.
Sorry, Gigi. Matthew wanted to say something, I think.
Okay, Matty, you're up, please.
So I think just based on everything you've said, what I personally like about these images is that they're not showing them in struggle. They are showing these women as women, not showing their circumstances like these beautiful, like these images have innocence to them. They have like if you're somebody looking at something like this, you would see yourself in them because you're not necessarily attached to the struggle, even though it's showing like something really intense. But the fact that they're humanized is a really, really powerful way to like see these women.
That's perfect. Dione, please go ahead.
I agree with that point, but the image for me, it also shows, it gives you like a sense of empathy towards the woman. So it doesn't necessarily convey exactly what the women have gone through in the story when you get the context. But as soon as you look at it, you do feel a sense of empathy towards them.
Awesome. Yes. So these images in this gallery is to highlight the devastating impact of the female genital mutilation practice, which is deeply rooted in cultural traditions, but with severe consequences for those affected. So if we look at the title itself, I feel the scar, and I know it's a lifetime scar. It reflects the emotional and physical trauma that these girls endure, marking them for life, actually, not just with the physical scars, but also with enduring the psychological pain that it comes with. So these images depict the lived experiences of women who have undergone FGM, focusing on the permanent marks it leaves behind, both visible and invisible. So what makes these visuals powerful? It's supposed to invoke empathy and raise awareness about the lasting effects of such harmful practices. But the overall tone and method of capturing and editing these images convey a message of hope. There is healing. So the gallery serves a stark reminder of the importance of advocacy and education to end FGM and protect future generations from this practice, but it's done in a very respectful and sensitive way that still focuses on the dignity and the preservation of the woman and capturing all of these different elements that we are speaking about, their innocence, their lived experiences, their smiles, their environment, the things that they have to struggle with, and the simple pleasures like sitting under the thatched roof in the sun with her mother was something that was important to capture, right? So if we think about things, and we look at it through a lens of what we can learn, what elements makes a compelling story is something like empathy. So creating an impactful narrative, especially in the NGO sector, involves several key elements. So the first thing that we will address here is empathy. That's understanding and conveying the emotional experiences of those affected by the issue. So in the example before, the characters were centralized through the sharing of personal stories, highlighting their struggles and focusing on the resilience as the most important thing, right? So this fosters a deep emotional connection with the audience, making the issue more relatable and compelling while being clear on bias. The bias is being the eradication of the FGM practice in Tanzania. Right? So if we just move on there, we'll see that the next thing is relevancy, which ensures that the story addresses current significant issues and connects with the audience interests and concerns. So for instance, framing the FGM story within the broader context of global human rights efforts emphasized why it matters today and how it aligns with ongoing advocacy movements, right? So if we just go on here, we will see that the importance of such practices is to emphasize the significance of the issue and the impact of the proposed solutions. So in this case, statistics, expert opinions, and the consequences of the practice on individuals and communities were highlighted. So this helps underline why the issue deserves attention and action, because remember, we are also interweaving behavioral science here, and we want people to have an action. It gives us the scale of the issue, right? And this links into our advocacy. So in terms of advocacy, oh, sorry, this is clarity. Let me just check. There's advocacy. Oh, no. Okay, just imagine this advocacy. So we use the narrative to advocate for action and for change in action, which is a behavioral science communication directive, which is just highlighted now. So this includes calls to actions or ways the audience can get involved. And in the story, this involved promoting educational campaigns, supporting local organizations, working to end the practice, and participating in policy advocacy efforts. So in the story, that explains what happened. To combat this, the Children's Dignity Forum hosts workshops with young girls to inform them of their rights, the dangers of the ritual, and the importance of education, while also placing pressure on traditional leaders to influence communities to encourage female empowerment and agency. And her voice falters when she says, "When I touch my private parts, I feel the scar. I know it is a lifetime scar." So now Leah uses her story to educate others, to correct misconceptions, and to empower women in her community. She attends sessions facilitated by the CDF to build her knowledge and actively informs her relatives of the trauma young girls face when undergoing genital mutilation and the lasting psychological and physical effects she carries with her to this day. So at this precipice, I know we need to also just move this along. I'm going to stop here and then pass on to Pumza, who will take us through the assignment if she is ready at this point.
Hi, Gigi. Yes, I am. I'm ready. If you please could pull up the assignment for me. So hi everyone. It's so good to be with you for this part of the session. So this assignment is designed to consolidate everything that you've learned across module 1 to 3. Like Apiwe said, everything is interwoven, right? And we want to apply it to a practical case. So think of it as a rehearsal for real world advocacy and obviously your social impact work. The core concept here is intentionality. So we're not just creating content for the sake of creating creative content, right? But you want to now, I'm sure from the first assignment, everything that you do needs to be strategic. And then in module 2, we learned, about audiences, right? And it needs to be audience centered. So all your content needs to be strategic, audience centered. And then the third thing is that it needs to be aligned to your bigger purpose, right? To your organization's bigger purpose or goal. Why does this matter? Because in our sector, content is not neutral, right? The way we frame issues, the platforms we use, the stories we tell, like Gigi, just demonstrated for us, can either reinforce stereotypes, right? Or shift an open space for justice and even conversations around issues. So this assignment is a chance for you to practice communication as a tool for social impact and change. I'll go through the first section of the assignment, right? So everyone does section 1 of the assignment. This is the foundation of your content for communication and impact-driven communication, right? So the first thing that we do is that we need to choose one priority audience cluster. By now, you know the difference. Audience cluster or audience type from module 2 as a reminder. And the challenge here is for you to be specific, right? We learned this in module 2. So you don't want to be vague in the way that you speak about your audience. You want to be as specific as you possibly can. So when you're talking about maybe young unemployed people, if it's an audience in a specific location, you'll say, for instance, young unemployed women in Parklands, or fathers of children under 5 in rural Eastern Cape. So you want to be as specific as you possibly can, right? Because when we are vague, our impact is vague. When we are precise, we can speak directly to lived realities. Again, going back to seeing your audience as human and not just, a target audience or, these people that we need to communicate with. The second thing is around goals. So what is it that you want this audience to do, think, or feel differently? This is where impact starts. For example, parents who read to their children 3 times a week. That's just, it's not just a communication outcome. It's also a social change outcome, right? That links to literacy, confidence, future opportunities, but also closeness, right? Because we know what that does. It creates a bond. Parents reading to their children creates a bond between those two people. The third thing is channels. So where do you find your people? Is it on WhatsApp? Is it at the taxi rank? Is it in their local community groups, whether that's a church group? Is it on TikTok? Is it on Facebook? Where are they? We don't dictate where people engage with us, right? We meet them in their ecosystems. Jaren spoke about this. So we meet people where they are. And then the fourth thing is communication solutions. So what content formats can connect meaningfully with with this type of audience? So we talked about parents reading to their children. So if it's, for instance, you're communicating with parents on WhatsApp, how do you create content formats that will connect with this audience in a meaningful way? Maybe this is an opportunity to bring in multilingualism. So you could share audio books in isiXhosa that would be bedtime story for their children. So the point here with communication solutions is that you want to keep it simple, repeatable content that can shift behavior and dismantle harmful narratives over time. I want us to do a quick check-in. So if you had to pick one audience right now from your audiences, right? You've done module 2. Who would it be? Drop it in the chat as we go along. So section 1 is basically where you bring in your theory into practice. So your theory of change. So you're aligning your audience strategy and your theory of change so that your content actually moves people towards the change that you want them to have. Do we have any questions or any points of clarity? I know people are, I hope you are dropping, your the type of audiences that you would ideally like to speak to in the chat. Do we have any questions so far? Okay. So section 2 of your assignments Please go to section 2, Gigi. So everyone does section 1, like I said, everyone does section 1. Section 2, you get to choose one of 4 options. Each option gives you a different lens for creating impactful communication strategies. So option 1 is around topics and ideas that you brainstorm. And this is, think of it as creating a content bank for your evergreen content. I know there's a few people that I've been speaking to that want to actually create evergreen content for their work. So this is tied to your organization's pillars, right? So an example would be, a topic would be staying in school, for instance, and then your subtopic could be, okay, so what are the things that actually enable or allow people to stay in school, homework, a mentorship, those kinds of things, mental health. That's also like one thing, right, that you would add there under a subtopic under staying in school. So this over time, if you create this content bank, ensures that you have consistent, value-driven messages that keep communities engaged over the long term. So that's option 1. So that's just basically topics and ideas that you want to build on to create your evergreen content. Option 2 is around solution-based messaging. This is perfect for advocacy. So if you are running an advocacy campaign, I would say look at this one closely. Or if you are in the advocacy space and you're thinking about like you want to create solutions messaging for your advocacy topics, I would say this is an option to look at. So for an example, you could be working with in the GBV space, and maybe you're working around teenage pregnancy, right? And ending teenage pregnancy. So the problems, you identify your problem here. What would the problem be? In that instance, it would be obviously high dropout rates. We know that girl children who fall pregnant, there's a high likelihood of them dropping out of school. The values there would be, okay, so the values is education, which equals dignity and will give me future opportunities as a young pregnant girl or a young girl in school. Solutions, access to contraceptions and mentorship, possibly. And then the action would be, what is it that you are doing in your program to address this? Would be after school programs, whatever it is that you are doing there, right? So this is basically to help you not just describe the problem, right? But you're showing people what you are doing to solve the problem and what a better future looks like, and you're inviting your audiences to it. So this would work if you are in the advocacy space, or if you are thinking of running a campaign around a particular messaging arc that you possibly want to test out. Option 3 is creating innovative content concepts. And this is basically for if you want to run like a content series. So I know I've spoken in my cohort, there's a few people who actually want to do a content series. And this would be good if you want to actually change a narrative, you want to bust a myth, you want to like change a stereotype, things like that. I know that a few people, in my 1 or 2 people in my cohort are thinking of running campaigns around messaging, one around disability and another one around access to justice. So it could be anything. So this could be a TikTok series busting GBV myths, or I know there's one also person in my group wanting to create a chatbot for WhatsApp. So, a content series around giving parents, I don't know, information around child nutrition. And you could do this in interesting ways, of course. And think of this as just like your fresh formats, right? To break through the fatigue. Because we know what social media is like, right? In terms of the fatigue. And so this is like an interesting and a fresh way of basically changing a narrative or like creating content to speak on a particular topic or subject. And also like this, you know, when you think of innovative content concepts, it's also a way to make social justice issues more relatable and shareable because, you know, these are quite heavy topics. So this is just getting you into a space where you can like start thinking creatively around how to create content. And then option 4 is narrative shift. So, you know, I talked about this briefly. So you want to change a current narrative, right? And you want to give your audience a new, fresh narrative to challenge a stereotype. So one could be that, you know, men are natural leaders. And this new narrative that you want to shift people to is actually communities thrive when women lead, right? And narrative work is powerful because it's about changing the underlying beliefs that hold inequities in place. So those are the 4 options. And this is going to be based on obviously what you are thinking of doing your capstone project around. So it consolidates modules 1, 2, and 3 because you're talking strategy, you're talking audience, but then you're also tying it into, you know, your content. What is it that actually makes sense for where you are? And like I said at the beginning, at the heart of it is about intentionality. So aligning your content with your audience realities, organizational purpose, and then your social justice outcomes. And I just want to leave you with this, right? So for this assignment, don't, you know, don't chase perfection. Focus on clarity, alignment, and impact. And before you log off today, or you know, even like now, you know, you can put it in the chat or you can just start thinking about it. Which option will you commit to? So remember, I said section 1, everyone does. And then we have the 4 options based on where you currently are. So think of where your project, where your program, or your campaign is. What is it that you do most of the time? What is it that you want to improve on? What is it that you don't have? So I know some people don't have a structure at the moment in terms of their content planning, right? So this could be an opportunity for you to actually come up with those topics and brainstorm those ideas for your content bank. And then I know some people are ready to launch into campaigns. So now it's like, okay, maybe this is an opportunity for us to now build a solutions-based messaging arc for our campaigns. And you could do it for one topic, you could do it for 2, you could do it for like multiple topics. It just depends how much time you actually want to give this. And I will stop there. If we have any questions, please, 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 this is the floor. This is the opportunity for you to ask them.
Wow, guys, don't all come all at once.
Very clear then. Like, I think
Uh,
job done to us because
um,
if there are no questions, that means, you know, we've been very clear about everything.
Okay, so like an interesting question that I'd like to ask people is like, what do you take away from the session in terms of what you think about storytelling now? What impressions? I like what Matty had said in the previous section where she said, "Oh, it's interesting how the photography is now representing these women in a positive light, in an empowering and dignity framing." So that's an interesting thing that she noticed. Is there anything else that anyone else has noticed as a point of interest or an aha moment that you've experienced? Palu.
Hi, Titi, can I go? And this one
Yes,
is
please.
on your ears. This one is for you. In fact, it's for all of you. Going back to the FGM stories, One of the women is carrying a child and she's smiling. Could it be that she is carrying her scar with pride
Yes,
or proud
exactly.
of her culture? Yes.
She's
And
proud.
then,
She's proud of her culture, but at the same time, she understands the harms that it has perpetuated. So she's an advocate for FGM now after experiencing that and
mhm,
having a child of her own. And so she carries the scars with pride, but as a reminder
okay.
of her resilience, Balu. And I love that you noticed that.
And then in advocating for the complete abolishment of the tradition, would it mean that I, as a content creator, is imposing my opinions and ideals on her and on whoever else she represents?
Okay, so this is where the discussion about the theory of change comes in and your messaging, right? So this is an organization that is working to eradicate gender-based violence, and within that community, it was discovered that the people in the community they no longer see the benefit of FGM because it's used as a mechanism for for the men to control the women within the village in terms of marriage, so that
Mm-hmm.
they can gain cattle. So these girls don't go to school, they are then told to go through the practice and then are proposed to marriage. So the entire life's course is then being deterred by this practice. So it was a discussion about the tradition and the culture versus what is practical and what is empowering for the woman. And so the perception of how the traditions were carried out was being challenged by the very community, and that is how CDF came to creation. It is a community-led organization that was born out of the need to counter narrative, to create counter narratives to the norms of taking children 14 or 15, not even experiencing their first period yet, and then removing their genitalia for the purposes of traditional marriage. So that's the advocacy there, Paolo. It's aligned to the theory of change, and it's part of the organization, and the people involved are advocates in themselves telling their stories. Yes,
Thank you so
Nelisiwe.
much.
No problem, Balu, but it's a very interesting question. Thank you for raising that. It's good to understand your ethics and to understand when you're not imposing your own perceptions and bias onto the environment. And so that is why it's very important to question your own belief systems when undergoing any process. What are the biases that you believe, and how do you mitigate that from translating into the things that you create? Nilisiwe?
Cool. Hi everyone. I think what resonated and really stood out for me in today's session was when Apiwe mentioned the importance of us using our sort of content plans, communications or campaigns to really honor the people that we represent. And I have a bit of a question like around that. My question is around how do we then, of course, using our content to honor the people that we're representing, but also how do we strike this balance between also kind of making or kind of perpetuating a certain kind of stereotype, in the sense of kind of making those people the face of whatever is kind of negative or about about the kind of how these people are perceived. And I'll make an example with say for example youth unemployment, and we do know that people of color, and especially women, are just sort of young women and young people of color are disproportionately affected by unemployment in South Africa. And then, of course, in our communications, we'll probably, put this demographic sort of front and center in our sort of social media, social media posts or websites. But then also, I feel like there's a risk there with now. Kind of sending out this message that, for example, Black women are the face of unemployment. But so how do we kind of like, yeah, I guess, kind of find this balance?
So that is also where the research comes in, right? Remember, we are doing audience segmentation. So you are understanding your audiences and you are understanding where they are coming from. So when you are going to choose a representation, you are going to choose an appropriate representation of the demographic that you are dealing with through the audience types that you have segmented. And that is why we say look at your clusters so that you can align your theory of change, your narratives, and understand how to ethically story tell. So things like what are the impact that I might cause in telling the story, whether it's negatively or positively, after I've left, is an ethical question that you have to ask and something that your organization must have considered as well within their campaigning strategy. So, for instance, one of the projects that I'm working with was dealing with a key population with HIV and that's dealing with HIV and AIDS, and they have not been spoken to for a long time within the organization. So now there is a trust relationship broken down between the key population and the organization doing the intervention. So now the communications compartment is seen as a threat, right? Because a lot of the discussions in this group setting is to do with HIV status, and people within that group might fear being exposed, right? And that is not the purpose of the communication. So then in that case, you have to ask yourself, what are the ethics involved and how can I navigate this particular situation while holding the audience that I'm serving's best interest in mind always? So if I've got information that I want to impart in them, how do I communicate to them in from a position where they see me as a component empowering them, away from a force that is an imposing force that is coming there just to collect information and leaving, because this is the impression that a lot of people do have sometimes with communication and communicators. But that is a deeper kind of evaluation that organizations have to kind of see what their positionality is. But ultimately, you would not want to create stereotypes that will damage your advocacy. And you won't want to feed into existing stereotypes that reinforces the narrative even inadvertently. And so you have to look at your campaigning and your communication from a sensitivity point of view, from a demographic point of view, from an inclusion point of view, from a representation point of view. And your audience segmentation and the data that you collect to understand your audience is going to paint that picture for you. Does that answer your question, Lily, my love?
Yes, thank you so much, Judy.
I also want to quickly jump in there, Gigi. Nelisi, we're just around the fear of stereotyping your demographic or sort of playing into stereotypical rhetoric online. So part of what you can also do, just to expand on what Gigi is speaking to in terms of research. So when your messaging is also research led, it makes it a little bit easier to navigate and dispel some of those stereotypes. So for instance, organizations that deal with sex work oftentimes deal with the stereotype that people often assume that women are majority of sex workers. And yes, whilst that can be a black and white statement that assumes that it's just women, if you then ask the why, or the why is almost articulated in the reasoning behind why women are always the faces, as it were, of sex work. Once we really debunk the why, we start then getting to the bottom of, oh, actually there are other socio-political factors that contribute to the big number of women being in sex work. So you're not by doing that, you're doing two things. You responsibly talking about a demographic that is affected by patriarchy, by misogyny, by being marginalized by communities and being the most poor demographic, which oftentimes leads to sex work. But also what you're doing is you showing us the why. So there's a responsible way of talking about that narrative. It's almost like what Sarah was talking about in that session we were talking about social and behavior change patterns within our comms, that we're not just raising awareness, but we're responsibly talking about the demographics that we represent in our content. So once you lean into the why, if you're talking about sex work, why is it that Black women are the face of sex work? When you actually debunk it, you're like, actually, they're not the face. They're being painted out to be the face, but these are the issues. It's because Black communities experience X, Y, and Z, and this is why it leads to us seeing more Black women being sex workers. If you want to even take it a step further to say, why are they ostracized in communities, you find that that might be a blanket statement, right? That there's an ostracization that's happening. You then question. So I think you always need to think about the why. You always have to include the why in your messaging because that why becomes critical in informing people about more information about learning about this thing, but also most importantly, it turns or at least it runs away from the risk of making it stereotypical rhetoric or stereotypical narrative. Same way when we are running away from poverty porn around gender-based violence, where we often talk about these very graphic stories around sexual violence. Oftentimes, the reason why there's been quite a big push around not only leaning into the more violent graphic stories is that we oftentimes the more passive sexual violent acts that happen in the workplace, that happen in relationships, oftentimes get sidelined because we have again made it seem as if when you are being dragged out of your car and you're being put in the bushes, that's the only definition of what sexual violence is. So again, when we start talking about the why and we start showing the research in our messaging, and not just working off of from what social sentiment is saying, but really showcasing the data and what it's saying with what's happening on the ground, then we start sort of shifting the needle because then there are facts. And I know obviously, as I think all of us here, we work online. So we know that oftentimes we deal with people who think they know when they don't know, but you can't argue with facts, right? You can't argue with actual data that has been researched. So once you start really having the why in the forefront of your messaging, you then do much more work in raising awareness, but also dispelling some of these myths. And it's also what Pumza was talking about, the myth busting, which could be also another innovative way of curating rhetoric and messaging that really speaks to the heart of some of the issues that we advocate for from coming from the different projects that we work on and coming from the different organizations that we work for. I think where the issue sort of is situated is where we then tend to deal with donors and funders who want a certain kind of narrative. And oftentimes those narratives sort of play into those stereotypes because I suppose sometimes the facts can be a bit uncomfortable. I think if someone is against sex work, they're not going to be interested in the why. In fact, they don't care about the why because then there has to be this narrative that has to be pushed. And it is an uncomfortable one because it means that you have to put the mirror to the society or to put a mirror to the people who might not necessarily believe in sex work is being protected. And I mean, it's currently what we're seeing right now. There's a lot of pushback, and that pushback is usually comes from men, and the women who also do have that pushback are usually informed by patriarchal ideologies around sex work. So already there's just a whole world of facts and information that you can pull from. So the long and short of it is, I think once you lean into the facts and the data that actually helps you build your story, it makes it a little bit less leaning onto the stereotypes, but more so make it factual. And I think once you lead with the facts and the why, you're able to dispel the myths and also raise awareness as part of that and inform people.
Awesome. That is awesome, Apiwe. That is why module 3 is so important because it's going to ask you these questions and help you plan your content so that everything that Apiwe has mentioned in terms of how you create the content is considered so that is based in fact and driven by data instead of perpetuating the same kind of stereotypes that we see often. And because you are in the position within an organization where you are dealing with certain clusters of participants, you are in a position to be able to argue that point better. And remember, your why is your theory of change, right? You came in there with an understanding of this is the problem, and this is how we are going to remedy the problem with certain solutions. And that is your theory of change. And that is why we always say link it back there so that your narratives can adapt, but the stories that you tell differentiate and tell of the perspectives and the nuance of the advocacy that you are perpetuating. Yeah. So is there anybody else with a question or a sentiment? Okay, over to you, Happy, where I think we've got it.
Awesome. Thanks, Gigi. So yeah, before we close today, I'd just like us to take a moment just to reflect together on what on the many. Oh, Paul has a question.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I don't have a question, but I have a moment of reflection, more especially of what is happening in the ground right now. I mean, in our organization, we our part of our audience is refugee and asylum seekers and migrants as a whole as well, which is under the Refugee and Migrants Rights Program. And I want to reflect on what you mentioned about building trust and building relationships with your clients and audience. I think also for us, I think it's a bit of a difficult moment right now because we want to actually try to amplify their stories and try to put their stories out there and what they're going through. But they're scared right now because of obviously about anti-migrant sentiments and also, the crazy things that are happening on the ground. So you find that you also have campaigns that you have planned throughout the year, but because of what is happening now, you'd find yourself, your clients also having that distrust with, um, obviously us telling their stories. So stories are stuck there and not being able to be carried out. But even besides things that were already planned, we have an issue with obviously we have to protect them at this point. But at the same time, you want to also release their stories. You also want them to tell their own stories about what is happening now, which is the most humane thing that can happen to them currently. And yeah, it's just something that I think what we are trying to do is to rebuild that trust, but it's also difficult because at the same time you have to protect them. At the same time, you have to realize that the timing might not be right, but also silence is also offering the groups that are involved in this activities impunity. You're basically amplifying and totally just not being able to protect your audience and clients, which is something that is a bit difficult at the moment.
Mpo, that's a very good question. So, as an example, I worked with an organization that also dealt with the same issue, which is refugee health and rights. It's also part of like the conglomerate of the Solp Sonke network. They had the same issue, and a lot of the issues we tried to also include the migrant. Like if we were talking about public transport safety, we would also look at the issue of refugees having to access these points as well, because they are often the most traumatized by acts of sexual violence. As they feel that they don't have the citizenship or the humanity enough to go to the police and seek help and actually get help. So they often are the more silent and withdrawn population group. But what we did there was that we got stories from them without identifying their faces. So we would tell their stories and remove any identifying markers, because the story is important and the journey on which they struggled and the challenges they faced and how they overcame it is the essence of what we wanted to extract, so that we can tell their stories in a voice that has authority, because sometimes we feel it gets lost within the abyss of everyone else speaking, and in addition they tend to be silent. So what we did there was that we got them into a workshop to just work on trust relationships. And we started explaining what it is that we did. We went through an activity with them where we gave them some tools for their own storytelling, and then they told their stories. And then we just helped to edit and refine and make sure that they aren't identified through their stories. I did another documentary where I was talking to refugee and migrant workers who were seeking asylum, who were sex workers as well, and they were raped often near where they were doing their business by police officers. So we told their story without identifying them as well, and it was broadcasted on SABC. And to just balance out that narrative, we got people in advocacy positions to speak about the issue and how the intersectionality of these issues and also the governmental beef that they have with each other, social development, destroying the condoms, and the police issuing arrests with evidence of condoms being the evidence, is an issue because it also demotivates the practice of safe sex, right? So it's a very intersectional and comprehensive issue that you have to look at. But first, you have to look at how to repair the trust relationship and then ask them how they want their stories told. But then reassure them that there are methods of storytelling that you can employ that will remove the identity away, because all you want is the content of their journeys and their lived experience to add to the advocacy and the voices of many that are now being unheard. And I think that if you approach it from a genuine perspective like that, you will see some positive change, because people do want to tell their stories. As like you said, they just are scared of the retaliation and of not being heard, because trust me, they have told their stories before and there was no action. And so they often left themselves with a question of like, what is the point? You know? Yeah, but anyone else in the team wants to contribute?
Just briefly on my side before I close, I think Mpho, your position in just dealing specifically with narratives around migrants, digital nomads, xenophobia in South Africa is still quite a very contested playground, and it's still quite a very complicated, and you almost always all the time towing the line. And I think again, education is what makes it difficult to navigate that space. I think generally the South African population is not largely educated a lot about immigration. And I mean, of course, there's just so many categories even there. We're talking about refugees here. It's not a blanket. We're not dealing with blanket categories of people who are coming into the country. And so I think again, it is quite a very contested space, and I think it will rely again more so on education and research, and as Gigi is saying, leaning a lot onto that storytelling to tap into those empathetic trends that you can sort of trigger in our country. But yeah, I think just because of time, I'm going to close the session and just sort of say thank you to everyone who came, and obviously much appreciated from these takeaways and some of the questions that came up. I think we're still alive with ideas and energy, and just to remind everyone that all the resources that we've used today and the modules, the tools and the assignments are available on Moodle. So please do revisit them as you start applying some of these lessons. And also remember that our coaching groups are there for ongoing support. We learn best really when we learn together and we lean into each other. So please make sure that you use this community as that you tap into some of the folks that are here with part of this journey. So make sure that you lean into the community and the people that are available. And before I say goodbye, I'm going to hand over to Pumza.
Yes, no, just a reminder, community mixer next week, Friday, work-life balance. If you haven't RSVP'd, please do so.
Awesome. Thank you, Pumza. I'll leave you with this thought that storytelling that changes lives is never just about creativity alone, but it's about the balance between creativity and care, as Pumza had mentioned earlier on. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I said evening. I don't know why I'm taking us into the
Go do
Thanks,
that, go sleep.
Apiwe.
Thank
Lovely
you.
session. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
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 Okay.